Welcome everyone, Costine here with a discussion about unit caps in Total War Warhammer 3. I would say Immortal Empires, but I'm using the Old World mod for the sake of this video. But obviously this is mostly relevant with respect to Immortal Empires. Be a modded, unmodded, that doesn't matter. The situation remains the same. Now, there are some people who are in favor of unit caps because they would argue that you can get to a point as a player where you just make an entire stack of dragons or thunder barges and you just sweep all before you. To which my reply to those kind of comments would be, yeah, if you get to that point where we can afford an entire stack of thunder barges, why are you putting all of your thunder barges in one army when you can have them spread around? Like a couple of thunder barges in each army is actually going to be more effective. And even getting that many thunder barges is not a good way of using your resources. It is generally a better idea, instead of making a doom stack, to make as many armies as possible and spread them around to take more territory. And regardless, by that point in the campaign where you can afford it, you've essentially won the campaign, because the challenge of a campaign is always going to come in the early game. Once you get to the point of being able to recruit high-end units, the campaign is over. Like, I can count on one hand, for instance, the number of times I've even recruited elven dragons in a campaign, and the idea of making a full stack of them, I have not done so. In the thousands of hours I've spent playing Warhammer 3, I have not done so, because there are just better ways of using my resources to, you know, conquer more territory by having more armies, having more heroes, all that kind of stuff. That is my perspective on that subject. But why do unit caps not work? Well, let's consider who has unit caps. And I'm not talking about like grudge sellers for the dwarves. I'm not talking about Elfarian or Elspeth. I'm talking about the Chaos Dwarves, the Beastmen, and the Tomb Kings. All three of these races have similar issues in the sense that they start at their weakest point, and then once they overcome the unit cap situation, they become nigh on unstoppable. Now, I'm going to use the Chaos Dwarves for the purposes of this video, because we can talk about the issues that Tomb Kings have, army capacity limitation, hero capacity limitations, all that, or the Beastmen have. But I don't think anyone can argue against the point that the Chaos Dwarves are a fairly powerful race within the context of Warhammer 3. But here's the problem. Early on, you can only recruit hobgoblins in an unlimited capacity, and while they're good enough to deal with the early game challenges, you get to a point by, let's say, turn 20 when you pretty much just want to stop recruiting them and go full on, for the most part, with Chaos Dwarf units. I mean, some Wolf Raiders will always be useful for the mobility on the battlefield, but outside of that, you'd probably want an army like this. And that is how things work. But here's the issue. You start with only one unit capacity for each type of unit. And to increase that capacity, you need to get armaments, or if you're playing Tomb Kings, you need to get structures, or if you're playing Beastmen, you need to spend dread that you could spend on many other things as well. That's one of the problems of the Beastmen. But here's the issue. By the time that you can recruit a significant number of these units, you've won your campaign. So if the idea is, oh, let's limit the player's power, but give them really powerful units, it just doesn't work out for any of the races, not necessarily specific lords or the limitations that the dwarves have with grudge sellers, but for none of the races does it end up working all that well. Because you look at the Chaos Dwarf situation. Not only do you have the limitations on armies, but the more you increase your unit caps, the more upgrades you get in the manufactory. And the thing about this is, I've played quite a few campaigns as the Chaos Dwarves. I almost never care about these upgrades. Not because they're not powerful, but because it's just better to spend the armaments I have to unlock more unit capacity. Or even further, to consider the situation of, say, for instance, spending armaments to increase hero capacity by getting certain structures that require armaments. So there's just better ways of spending our resources as opposed to just upgrading a few units. It's better to just get a lot of these units that require armaments to increase their capacity, better to get heroes, than to end up having an armament upkeep for your units. That is where I stand on that issue. And it just leads to this kind of situation where, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff over here for the Cast Dwarves. There's a lot of fun stuff for the Beastmen. There's a lot of fun stuff for the Tomb Kings. But you almost never use it when it actually matters in a campaign, which is in the early game. So that is one of the inherent limitations and one of the problems over here. It's limiting your early game and making that less interesting and making it less replayable as well. Because if you can't get these units, if you can't get a good number of these units, and especially the high quality units in decent numbers, until you've basically won your campaign every single time, then that is killing your replayability. Because playing with Beastmen Archers, or Tomb King Spearmen, or Cast Dwarf Hobgoblins, well, the replayability factor is going to take a severe hit as a result of it. Now, one of the inherent issues of Total War has always been that the early game, again, is the biggest level of challenge, not the mid or late game. That is a whole discussion in its own right, and something that Creative Assembly has never been able to manage effectively. You could talk potentially about Attila, but honestly, Attila is just really an annoying experience. It's not something that they should replicate over there. Because, like, yeah, Attila is just like cheesing siege battles in order to obliterate enemy armies, or cheesing minor settlement battles, surviving for a period of time, and then just steamrolling the game. That is not a great experience that they should replicate. And the endgame crisis is a joke in Warhammer 3. Other systems that they've tried, I think the only time that they were able to make the endgame interesting was actually with Free Kingdoms. Because you would start playing a faction, and then you would have two other factions that would become your rivals, so to speak. The two other emperors that you'd contend with. Or you can consider the antagonist faction that you had in a Total War Saga Troy. That was a much better system. Those systems were much better than the things like Endgame Crisis. And yes, there are some factions that have a huge amount of potential, but they're never able to keep up with you as a player. In terms of like getting good quality heroes, getting good quality items, or getting good quality units or in enough numbers to spread them around in various armies to become a really potent force on the campaign map. And unicaps just, you know, make this whole situation more annoying. Because consider the situation with Tomb Kings. Like, Tomb Kings, they are really frustrating to play early on. But then once you get rolling, because all your unit recruitment is free, you don't care if you lose your entire army. The only thing you care is if you lose heroes before they have Immortal. You don't care, basically. If at one point you just stop caring about the Tomb Kings and there's nothing to present any challenge. With Beastmen, you do care about trying to preserve individual armies, but again, you don't care about individual units. And with Cast Dwarves, sure, you do have upkeep, you do have money that you need to spend for these units in the first place. So you do have a level where you do care about these units, and you do try and keep them alive. But again, same situation, you overcome that early game, and yes, you do get that great variety of armies, great variety of units, you do unlock a lot of the fun stuff, but becomes, by that point, it's like, you've won the campaign, it's just tedium, it's just the intern simulator, as I'd call it. And I think that's something Creative Assembly should move away from. Because, understand this, inherently in the game, we don't just want to put all our best units in a single army. Like, if you're a competent player, if you have any clue of how to play this game in any way, shape, or form, that is something you will inherently understand. That you don't want to just put every single bit of combat power in one army. You might have some better armies than others, to be sure, you know, to deal with the biggest threats, For instance, like your Legendary Lord army, you know, might have the best units available in them, for instance. Or maybe not. Maybe you put your best units in a secondary army because the Legendary Lord army has the Legendary Lord with all the power that comes in it. So you put a significant portion of your combat power in an army like this over here to deal with another front, because you know your Legendary Lord is going to be able to deal with a lot of things on his own. Those are the kind of decisions you have to make. So if the idea of unit caps is to provide a limitation, then it's not working out in a way that's making the system interesting. And again, it's just reducing that replayability. Because I love the Cast Dwarf design as a race. I like dealing with the resource system, etc. What I don't like is, like, every single time I start one of their campaigns, I'm dealing with the same thing over and over and over again. Playing with hobgoblins, spending, you know, dozens of turns to get it going, and by that time, you know, once you deal with Grungor and Immortal Empires, it's GG, well played, campaign is over. Replayability, even with the changes to the AI, they haven't made enough of a difference to really change that particular dynamic. It has made the AI better and more aggressive at, you know, getting higher level settlements, being able to use its resource, but again, the early game is where it's at. To be sure, I'm not saying the AI improvements were pointless, because they certainly have made campaigns more interesting. Like my Belegar campaign was the most fun I've had in a campaign in a long time. But I just don't see what the kind of benefit is for unit caps. What do they add exactly to the game? And if people have an answer to that, I'd like to hear it. Now, there would be a discussion on the subject of army caps, like you can only have so many artillery units, so many single entities, so many heroes, all that. That would be a worthwhile discussion, but that's not how the system works. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.